Hi, this is Aaron Gerhardt, and for my show and tell presentation, I am sharing TimelineJS. Essentially, you can make your own very interactive timeline with lots of different multimedia embedded into it on this website. You see here that TimelineJS, it's an open source tool, which means you don't have to subscribe to it. It's available to anyone, and you can build really great timelines with students. And all you need to use is the Google Sheets application to put in your information that you want in your timeline. Um, I'll show you an example of my timeline in a second. You can see here that it limits you to, well, they don't limit you, but they say you should probably keep it to 20 slides. Um, and then it works to have a strong chronological narrative. So, for example, if you were telling the events of something that happened in history, like World War II, you'd want to list years, and I'll show you how you can put those in just a little bit in Google Sheets. Um, and you can add some narration. You can also add some multimedia, uh, Twitter posts, YouTube videos, Google Maps can be embedded, SoundCloud audio files, etc. There's a link here on the main website where you can view the types of sources you can embed and how to go about doing that. And again, the website to get here is timeline.nightlab.com. So here's the steps of how you make the timeline. First, you have to get the Google spreadsheet template. So you click here, and you can click Use this template, and it'll make a copy in your Google Drive for you to use. Here is the one I used. I had to make a timeline in my TCH 530 class that I'm also taking right now about my technology use over the course of my teaching career. So you can see here the leftmost columns you have to put in the starting year, and you can add a month and a date and even a time if you want. I kept it to year for the most part. And then end year and end dates go here. You have a column for the display date that will appear on the slide of your timeline. And then you have, I guess I should show you the example here. This is what my timeline looks like. This is the cover page. And I annotated this for class over YouTube. I did a screen video, much like I'm doing now. So you see here, this is kind of my timeline. You can see down at the bottom, you can kind of view by year the different events that are posted in the timeline. And I've embedded photos, and the photos I embedded, I included a link from Google+. That's one of the ways that you can embed photos. You have to have a web address to get your photo to link up to your timeline. If I go a little farther here, you can see here that I can embed a YouTube video that I created where I was giving the people in my other course a tour of the STEM lab that was just built in the school where I teach right now, the elementary school I teach at. And there's another YouTube video I created for that class that I embedded here. Again, those are just some of the forms of multimedia that you can embed in your timeline using TimelineJS. So going back to the spreadsheet, and I'll show you how to get the data from the spreadsheet to appear in a timeline momentarily. You have a headline, kind of like the title of each slide of your timeline, narrative text, and then here's where you put the link to the media. So I posted those images that you saw on my Google Plus page, and then I retrieved a link that I copied and pasted here. A media credit, I just put myself because they're all my pictures. You can add a caption to your media, whether it's a YouTube video, an image, or what have you. I didn't do any media thumbnails for this particular project. And then at the very end here, it defaults to, I believe, white and gray background colors. As you can see on mine, I customized it to different background colors that kind of went with my photo that I thought looked nice. Okay, and to do that, you had to get these color codes. I noticed that there was a color code for like the gray background, so I found a website that was colorhex.com. What you can do is you can go to this color palette at the top. You can get any color you want. You can customize it within a certain hue. And you need this code right here with the hashtag symbol preceding it. And you can just copy and paste those codes right into this background column within each row of your events in your timeline. So again, I just input all of that here. I did put some dates here. For example, when I earned my Google Certified Educator Level 1 status, I did post that date here. I got specific there. So when you're done, you have to publish your Google Sheet to the web so that TimelineJS can latch onto it. So you go to publish to the web, and I've already done that. And eventually, when you publish it, you'll get a link. You need this link, so you copy this link. You go to the TimelineJS page, and you scroll down here, and you want to copy and paste, or excuse me, just paste rather, your published link for your Google Sheet here. You can customize the width and the height of how it would appear when you embed it on a website or when you share the link to it with somebody. So if I want to preview what my timeline looks like as it is, I click preview and it pops up in the preview area here. If I want to go back and make some changes, I simply return to my sheet, make those changes, and then I can re-preview it here. They give you an embed code, so you can embed it right on a web page. It's an HTML embed code. And they also have a preview link that you can obtain right here, get link to preview. And you can have it appear as a standalone web page link that you can email or link to wherever you're trying to share your timeline, and then people can just scroll right through it like you saw before. You can also navigate, I should mention, down here in the actual timeline area. If I scroll down a little bit again, you can see those dates, and you can get specific to month as well as year down here. They have a zoom in and zoom out option here for how specific or not specific you want to be in your timeline area here. Okay. And you have this back arrow that can take you all the way back to the title page. I should mention also when you're putting your data in for your timeline in Google Sheets, the very first row is your title page of your timeline, and it will default as a title page as long as you don't stick a start or end date here in this first row. The other thing to note is that the TimelineJS is based on a type of coding called JSON. I don't know a lot about coding, but the one note they make here that made sense to me is that it's a lightweight data interchange format. It is easy for humans to read and write. It is easy for machines to parse and generate. So what that says to me, and it's based on JavaScript programming, what that says to me is that it can take data that you input and multimedia links that you input in Google Sheets and translate them to a pretty slick looking timeline that's relatively easy to create. Now, in connecting TimelineJS to some of the theories and discussions we've been having in the course so far, I kind of made a big connection to the discussion we had on affinity spaces in our group discussion this past week. Some of us were talking about the idea that James Paul Gee introduced of portals, and I think that TimelineJS, what I found interesting about it was that there's a variety of portals through which students can either tap into content or even connect their own interests or even affinity spaces of their own to the space that in which they're learning and creating a timeline for content related purposes. You can see here under media types they can embed digital imagery, YouTube videos, SoundCloud audio. They can even tap into their social media through Twitter, through Instagram. You see here Google Plus. And kind of the list goes on and on. Wikipedia, if you're so inclined to utilize Wikipedia sources, there's pros and cons against that, which I believe were also discussed in some of our discussions this past week. But I think the idea that you can tap into all of these different media streams to complete this a timeline project is really nice. The students can kind of individualize it for their own purposes. Demonstrating their learning in a variety of ways. That was another big theme in our discussion group this past week. And another connection I made to some of the recent literature in class was in the Thomas and Brown piece that we read for the upcoming week. They talked about kind of this dichotomy. They called it a new culture of learning, where um, we kind of make that shift from a more static learning environment and way of teaching and learning in the classroom to more of that fluid technology driven rather space of learning where you things are constantly shifting and morphing. Students are creating things, and there's a connection between a lot of different platforms. And I think TimelineJS is kind of an example of that, where a timeline itself can be a pretty rigid thing. It's organized chronologically, whether by day of the week or month of the year or years, on several calendars, depending on your timeline. You have the events, and you might write a little bit about those. You might put a picture, but here we're embedding a lot of different content to make connections, to illustrate understanding, maybe describing how maybe our impression of a concept changed as a result of creating the timeline. Again, in my timeline that I created for my class, I laid out my technology use over my career, and I realized I didn't get very student centered with my technology until about 18 months ago, not in a real way. And I wouldn't have come to that realization if I hadn't created that timeline. So it was a pretty transformative experience, in my opinion. And the last connection I made was actually from an article you see here. It's called Technology Mapping, an approach for developing technological pedagogical content knowledge. I was critiquing this article for TCH 562. It's about a core course in the doctoral program about teacher education. And I was reviewing it more for the teacher education components, but in the article, they discussed different strategies, teaching strategies that they were working with undergraduate pre-service teachers for using with younger students using the Excel program. And I had never really considered Excel to be anything more than a data entry platform. But as you've seen in the demo here with TimelineJS, you can use it for a variety of purposes, including inputting data here as a means of creating a timeline. It looks like this. And I guess I just never saw Excel as a platform for that, or in this case, Google Sheets, which is, in my opinion, an offshoot of that. It's a spreadsheet program just like Excel. I also think I kind of made the connection. I have a little bit of HTML coding experience, very, very basic, embedding, doing HTML font edits, that type of thing. And it was kind of cool to make that connection between inputting data in a spreadsheet and having it spit out timeline with multimedia linked to it and everything. I I think that's a valuable experience for students to have. Um, Everything's not just drag and drop. There's a science behind it, and maybe a platform like TimelineJS can build the appreciation that technology is all built on basic components that we probably don't have as much understanding of as we ought to at times. And so um, those are the connections I made between what I've been learning in this course and other courses and TimelineJS. I think it's a really interesting tool. I don't know if I'd be able to necessarily use it at the moment with my third graders. It'll depend on if we make the jump into Google Sheets as part of our Google initiative. But wanted to share that with you guys. Please post your comments and questions and whatnot, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have that I didn't address in the video.